Welcome to another episode of TolkCast, the podcast of the German Tolkien Society. Today's guest is Catherine McIlwaine. She is the Tolkien archivist at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. We had the chance to interview her in August of 2022 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the occasion of the exhibition opening of Tolkien, The Art of the Manuscript at the Marquette University. Normally, our podcast is in German, but every so often we get to interview amazing people. These sessions remain in the English original. To get to the regular podcast episodes and to the German translation of this interview, just follow the link in the description. Have fun now and enjoy the interview with Catherine McIlwaine. So I'm sitting here at Marquette University in the Haggerty Museum of Art with Catherine McIlwaine, who most of you out there have heard before, but it's been a few years when we were having an exhibition in Oxford at the Bodleian Library, and we had the chance to interview her. And now she's back again here with us in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the US. Hello, Catherine. So good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, to get straight to the burning questions of our audience, we have here in the exhibition at the Marquette University loans from the Bodleian Library in Oxford. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
So, the first question would be, how many loans are there from the Bodleian?
There are 37 items, 35 of those come from the Tolkien archive, and 2 additional items, which are the William Morris volumes, which also came over.
So they're part of the exhibition, but they're not really, well, they are related to Tolkien for obvious reasons, otherwise they wouldn't be here, but they're not part of the Tolkien collection of the Bodleian.
No, so yeah, that's right. So we bought 35 items from the Tolkien archive from Oxford, and 2 other items from the Bodleian, the William Morris partially illuminated books.
How did the kind of collaboration come to be between the Marquette University and the Bodleian?
Well, probably your listeners know that the Tolkien collection is split between the Bodleian in Oxford and Marquette University in Milwaukee. And that came about because Tolkien sold the manuscripts for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and also threw in Farmer Giles of Ham and Mr. Bliss, just for good measure, in the late 1950s. So really before The Lord of the Rings became a huge bestseller, and when he was coming up for retirement. And the reason they came here was that they were the first people to ask for his manuscripts and to offer him a significant sum of money. And it was a time in his life when he thought that would be good. So then after that point, and after Tolkien's death, his family donated a substantial part of his archive to the Bodleian, and that's how the 2 collections are split. I think in a way that the Bodleian is a very natural home for Tolkien, because that's where he was a student, it's where he was a professor, where he lived, worked, where he's buried. But of course, Marquette have this very significant part of his archive. And so it's always been important to me as the Tolkien archivist that I made some connection out here, both with the people who look after the archive and also to get to know the archive. So this is actually my 3rd trip to Milwaukee. I've been twice in the past just to have a look. The first time I came, I concentrated on looking at the Hobbit manuscripts. And then the second visit was to look at the Lord of the Rings manuscripts. But on both of those occasions, it was about getting to know the team here, and that's Bill Fliss, who's their archivist, and Amy Carey, who's their head of special collections. And it was really great to build on those visits, and then we could email each other. We knew each other personally then, and we could ask each other questions about parts of the archive that are, in these different continents. So that was really the basis. And then, of course, building on the research trips that I made out here, we had the Maker of Middle-earth exhibition in Oxford. And what I really wanted to do with that exhibition was to bring part of the Marquette archive back so that we could have all the items in that exhibition, not just the items that the Bodleian holds. And that was really important to me. And Bill and Amy were so generous in allowing us to take any items that we wanted. So we actually borrowed 12 items from the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings collections for our exhibition. And then they were also generous to let it go, because we were collaborating with the Morgan Library in New York, and so those Marquette items also were allowed to go to New York. And then it was snowballed with the Paris exhibition at the Bibliothèque Nationale, and Marquette loaned a really huge amount of their collection to the Paris exhibition as well.
And so now the fourth step, so to say, in the exhibition history of Tolkien is now Marquette in Milwaukee. So were you approached by Bill and Amy, or did you know for a long time that there would be going to be another exhibition and you approached them? Do you want anything? Do you need anything?
I think it came after the Paris exhibition. So Bill and people more senior in the library at Marquette had come over to Oxford, and then they'd seen the New York show, and then quite a number of people from Marquette University travelled to Paris. And by that point, they were thinking, gosh, we've loaned so many items. And it's just, these exhibitions have been so successful in Oxford, New York, Paris. And, it was their collections that were really making it special. So I think at that point they thought, well, we need to do our own. And of course, when I found that out, I was very happy to do anything I could to help, because Bill had given me an enormous amount of help with his expertise, his knowledge, which is so important when you're looking at a collection that's so far away. Mm-hmm. I mean, those 2 research trips that I made in the past to Milwaukee, the trip goes really fast. You've got jet lag for most of it. You're trying to get your head around where you're staying and what the manuscripts mean, and then you go back to England, and then you realise all the things that you should have asked or looked at, and so Bill's just been so helpful through all our building my own exhibition at Oxford, and I really wanted to do whatever I could to make Marquette's exhibition a success. And that became much more involved and much more difficult when the pandemic struck and people could no longer travel easily, and the library itself in Oxford shut down twice over 18 months for significant periods, for 3 months, 6 months. It was just, a nightmare, basically. And you wonder if the exhibition could even happen, because nobody knew at that point how long was COVID going to go on. I mean, at first I thought, well, maybe we're going home for 2 weeks, and and then I didn't get back in the library in Oxford for 3 months, But they decided at some point at Marquette that they would carry on planning for the exhibition as though it was going to happen. And thank goodness it has happened, just as planned. It hasn't been delayed. But it meant that Bill and his co-curator, Sarah, couldn't come to Oxford and do the research that they wanted to do.
Oh, okay.
So I was much more involved then in helping them with various bits of technology and Zoom meetings to be able to virtually view those manuscripts. So we had a lot of sessions, about an hour and a half, 2 hours each, and over many months. So I would get out a lot of manuscripts and then try and show them And then, they could make their decisions. They could come back to me and ask to look at other material. It's definitely not the same as them being able to come and just go through the items themselves.
So how can we picture that? Did you actually hold up the manuscript to the camera on Zoom and say, this is it, do you want this? Or do you need another angle?
Yeah, I mean, technology is not my speciality, really. But I had a laptop where we connected on Teams. Everybody knows Teams now since the pandemic, don't they? I'd never used it before lockdown hit. And then I had my mobile phone, which I installed a piece of software called DroidCam. And then I put the mobile phone on a stand, and so then I moved the manuscripts underneath the phone, and the phone was then showing up on the Teams meeting. It nearly always broke down during every session, and I would have to struggle to either shut down the software, reopen it, reconnect. It was interesting. And one of the main issues was that what I could see on my computer screen, the manuscript looked right, and Bill and Sarah in Milwaukee would be saying, it's upside down, it's upside down.
Oh.
But as I was turning it was looking upside down to me. I was like, which way, right, left? So that was one of the tricky things.
It sounds very adventurous and also, how do we say, nerve taking. So it sounds like it was a really, kind of a hard work to do. And I mean, setting up an exhibition like this would be hard work anyway without the pandemic being there. So I think that maybe added extra to the stress level of all people.
Yeah, I mean, it involved me in more of the work with them, the research work and producing all that material and putting it all away and helping them then go through and answer all their queries after we'd had those sessions, and they'd ask for more information about, this or that item which had caught their attention. So there's definitely, a high amount of input from me, but all the decisions that they made were Bill and Sarah's, and the whole concept of the exhibition was entirely theirs. It was just purely had to get more involved to facilitate that because of lockdown. But that's been part of my job really all through the pandemic, because researchers couldn't come to Oxford. Really, this is the first summer that we've seen international researchers coming back to use the collection. So I was doing a lot more research for people who couldn't come to the UK. And sending them information and getting involved in a way that I wouldn't usually. And that's kind of fun as well because, I don't often get time to do that sort of research.
So the loans that are now in this exhibition, how did they get here? Did you bring them personally with you on the plane? Were they delivered before you arrived here?
Yeah, so I came as a supporting courier to help with the installation, but not to come with the manuscripts. So at the Bodleian, we always use a trained conservator to travel with manuscript material. And that was my colleague, Sally Ann, she's the exhibitions manager at the Bodleian Library. So she would travel, they were transported by art handlers, specialist art handlers, and she would travel on the van with the material, which had all been prepared in advance by our conservation team in the Bodleian. So it had been framed and mounted, packaged into large wooden crates with lots of packaging material, plastazote we call it, inside. So then Sally Ann travels on the truck to the airport, and then we have an art handler who is able to go airside. Do you know what that means? Because if you're a passenger, you have to stay on one side of the airport. So the art handler would be able to go through with the freight and see it onto the plane, and they would film that. And Sally Ann would go on the same plane and arrive here, and then she would have to go through her own customs, but then with the art handler at this end, the 3 crates would come off, clear customs, and then Sally Ann would go on the truck from Chicago it was to Milwaukee, and see it locked down at the Haggerty.
Quite the trip then.
It's quite a trip, yeah. There's a lot of responsibilities. You don't want to see anything damaged on the way. That's why we send a conservator. So it was a large number of items for us. We generally loan just 1 or 2 items to exhibitions or other institutions.
Wow, so 37.
So 37 was a lot, yeah. And Of course, not as many as went to New York or BNF. So yeah, it seems like whenever we do Tolkien, we do it big. But this is pretty unusual for the Bodleian. So we thought in the time available, I would come out as well to support that. So you have to watch the installation at this end and handle the material going into the cases rather than anybody else handling the Bodleian items.
Is there any an exhibit that you are particularly pleased that is now being on display? Because normally archives don't really do exhibitions, so this in itself is pretty special. Is there one exhibit that you're particularly pleased that's on display?
Do you mean from the Bodleian's collection or overall?
Let's do first Bodleian.
Yeah, they did pick some really nice items that hadn't been seen before and hadn't been out on display. So there's a lovely coat of arms, which Tolkien painted, a Tolkien coat of arms, which when I saw it on display now in the Haggerty, it's placed next to a book of heraldic coats of arms, and the colours of Tolkien's coat of arms and the one in the book are just perfect. It really ties them in together. So yeah, I think that's the thing about an exhibition that's different from the catalogue. So although every image is reproduced in the catalogue, what you get in the exhibition room is the connections between items. So you'll look across the room and turn around, and then something, two different items will speak to each other, as it were. Yes. So that's the really exciting thing about putting it in cases. And then the other Bodleian items, it's not so much the items, but it's the way that they're displayed. So we've got 3 items in one case on their own. And they're standing upright, which is pretty unusual. We wanted to show both sides of these items, or rather Bill and Sarah did. So they're 3 double-sided items. And they're very delicately framed and sighted in the case. It was a little bit terrifying seeing those items packed for travel, because unlike the framed items that have got on the wall, there's no glass in the frames. So they're almost just floating in a wooden frame and then standing upright in the case so you can see them all round. And I just think that they look pretty incredible.
They do.
Yeah.
We were talking just yesterday, and those are Tobias's favorite exhibits, because he said it's so special that he can, go around from both sides and then go back again. And then, you can just hop on either side of the display. So
the only problem with it is that whenever Tolkien seemed to do that and use the other side, he didn't flip it as you'd expect as you'd turn a page in a book. He flips it the other way. So there's always one side that's still upside down, but I mean, that's cool as well. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's Tolkien, and it speaks to how he, managed paper.
Yeah.
That's something you never think about, right? But then when you see it like that, come to think, okay, he did it the other way.
It's not just once or twice that he'd done that. Yeah, it's quite a theme that he turns the page the opposite way around.
Do you have a favorite kind of exhibit from the collection here at Marquette that's on display now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been here since last Saturday, and today's Friday, so I've seen the items in the cases when I wasn't working to oversee our collections going in. I was taking the chance to look at Marquette's items. There's just so much to take in, and it's not a collection I know very well. I just love to see all the different versions that Bill's got out of the different chapters in The Lord of the Rings, and to see how Tolkien's sort of building this up, because you sort of imagine that he just writes like these genius chapters. And then when you see the different versions, you think, okay, he's slightly improving it, and that sounds a bit odd. And then the next version, he's improving it again. So Bill's got out a really nice chapter from The Prancing Pony, where they discover the letter that's been left from Gandalf to Frodo. And it's just fascinating to see how that changes. We
were also thinking, well, we were always reporting back to Germany all that's happening here to our followers, to our members, to everyone who's listening in, because most of the people from Europe cannot do the trip and come here.
It's a long way, yeah.
It's a long way, and I mean, the exhibition is running for, I think it's 4 months to December, so it's not that long a time for someone to plan a trip and actually come over.
Yeah.
So we were thinking also, which items should are a must see or a must report to anyone who can't come. What would be an item that you'd say, okay, this is something you can also describe without seeing them? Not that you have to do that now, but if you have like 3 items, you say, okay, you can't see the entire exhibition, but these 3 are a must see before you leave.
Yeah, I think definitely the Book of Mazabul and how he builds that. I mean, because I'm familiar with the 3 finished watercolours that are in the Bodleian's collection, but what's fascinating is just to see those interspersed with the drafts that came before them. And there's a lot of drafts of the first page as Tolkien's figuring out how to do it, and it's amazing how much care he puts into it. He's drawing sort of grid lines and he's plotting it precisely, the torn edges. So what seems very random scrap of this burnt fragment is actually very carefully plotted out. And I think there's at least 4 versions before he gets to the final watercolour. The text nearly always seems to stay the same, actually, that's written on there, but he's trying to get it to look exactly like this damaged piece of parchment. But then I think there's only 1 draft of the second page and 1 draft of the third page. So probably by that stage he knew exactly what he needed to do in the process. And that's a little bit similar to our dust jackets that we have in the Bodleian for the Lord of the Rings. So there's a lot of versions of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is obviously the first one that he tried to do. And then less versions for the Two Towers, and then just 1 for Return of the King, with some just scraps of parts of that dust jacket, but really there's just 1 dust jacket. So yeah, he seems to put a lot of effort into the whole process at the start, and then he gets more confident what he's doing. So I think that's such a striking part of the exhibition here. That would be my must-see.
We were talking about the other 3 exhibitions. What would you say is the core difference between the Oxford, New York and Paris exhibitions that were linked in a way to each other, and the one taking place here in Milwaukee now?
Well, actually the Oxford exhibition and the New York exhibition were very closely linked. So the New York exhibition was a subset, if you like, of the Oxford show. They took about half the items from the Oxford show. But the Paris exhibition was actually something very different. It wasn't built on our Oxford exhibition. It was a completely new take on it. And they had... did you visit Paris?
We were in Oxford and in Paris, but we never saw New York. So that's those 2 links we have, and now here, but New York is missing in our experience. Yeah.
So New York, I think probably quite rightly, they cut down a lot of the material that related to Oxford as a place, and some of the material relating to Tolkien as a person. And although it was the same items, it looked very different. The aesthetic of the exhibition room had very bright colours. It was a sort of brightly lit exhibition space within safe parameters, and the items were framed on the wall, so you could get right up close to them. Whereas in the Bodleian exhibition, we use cases, and you can only get so close to the item. And I think there was a real need of Tolkien readers to get very close, because the Oxford cases were just covered in finger marks every day.
And probably nose marks too.
Yeah, as you don't realise you're getting close until your head bumps against it. So yeah, New York was nice because it had a very different design feel, and you could get up close to the framed items. Now, Paris was an entirely different exhibition built by their curators, and so they selected completely different items, and they had a very big space to fill, a huge space, and they again had a different design feel, and they wanted to bring in items from their own museum collections in Paris. I think that worked really well. It was nice to see objects like swords and and all sorts of medieval manuscripts from their own collections. And now Milwaukee again has a completely different feel to it, a completely different set of items which are on display. I'm sure that Bill was keen not to redo those 3 exhibitions that had gone before, and to just show a completely different exhibition and have a different feel to it. And because what they hold are the drafts of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they wanted to concentrate on the manuscript, and I think that's where the title and the whole concept has come from, the art of the manuscript. And then they're looking back to use of manuscript within Tolkien's work, like the Book of Mazabul and the draft letter from Gandalf. But then looking back at the manuscript tradition, which obviously Tolkien was steeped in as a professor of medieval literature. He used medieval manuscripts at the Bodleian in Cambridge, in London. And this was part of his knowledge and his experience. And so they're right to look back at that and where that feeds into his own work.
Okay, so there's one last question that we try to always ask people. And I think we didn't come up with that 3 or 4 years ago when we interviewed you before. Right. So here comes. If you could meet Tolkien or talk to him or write him a letter or in whatever way communicate with him, is there something you would like to ask him or to have his opinion on, or just say to him anything that you would like for him to know?
Oh, God.
Or maybe you have a manuscript and you say, okay, I really can't decipher what have you written there, something like that.
In terms of grilling him, I think I would probably just be completely overawed. I've spent probably about 18 years now working on the Tolkien archive at the Bodleian, and the more I find out about his skills and his knowledge and his writing, his academic work, just the more impressive he seems, his knowledge. But he was a very humble man. Honestly, I think if I came face to face with him, I wouldn't be able to speak. But just to thank him for his work, really. The Lord of the Rings is one of my favourite books ever, and each time I go back to it, I seem to get something new out of it and see something different in it. So really it wouldn't be a question, it would be more a question of giving him my sort of heartfelt thanks, really.
So there's no question left for, some
too many, that's why.
What did you do with this page? Okay, thank you so much, Catherine, for taking the time for your interview with us and for being here, for being as nice as you are ever.
Thank you.
And it was so great meeting you again.
Yeah.
And have a safe trip home. Get there in one piece. Take care and give many greetings to the Bodleian Tolkien staff back in Oxford from the German Tolkien Society, that way around. And just, hope to see you again soon sometime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, for giving me the time to talk to you today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.